All right, I think we can get going now. I think there are two issues here on Microsoft Teams that I've observed so far. One, there is a little bit of a lag and delay in what I speak and what appears on the screen for you. So possibly we'll have to bear with that. And second thing is the PowerPoint slides might have some videos, might have some text. Do not worry too much about videos if they are not running. Actually, they most of the things are either spoken by me or are already there on the uh, these slides. So it is okay if you are not able to look at some of those videos. Now, some of the things that I would like to tell you before we start. One is I'm sure you would on the right hand side of your computer app or on the mobile phone, you would have a Q&A button wherein you can actually type some of your questions and we shall be happy to address them. And you might also be seeing a chat room somewhere on the screen, either on the right hand side on the top or on your app on the Microsoft Teams app, where you can actually chat with us. So that said, let me begin the proceedings for today. So while thinking of this particular subject on the OKRs and the review system and the coaching system that is there as part of the OKRs, it is quite interesting to understand and know how do we actually set people for high performance, and that is the main objective of this particular session today. So it is not just about the OKRs, is not just about the methods of setting goals, but it's about the overall way of working through which an organization can get the best out of its people, get the best energies out of your people, and how do we set people for success rather than for mediocre performance. So that's the whole idea. And when I talk about OKRs, it is a lot of times we think that it's just a goal setting exercise or it's a goal review exercise or it's an end outcome that matters, and or it is about managers behavior and attitude towards the people who are working in the team. So these are the common issues that we often hear people are saying, but when we look at things very deeply, it's actually the work system itself that we have to look at, and whether it's the OKR or the Hoshin Kanri or some of these systems. In fact, these systems are as old. Even OKR is something which is running since the 1970s in IBM, and then thereafter in many other tech-led organizations like Google, etc. But the essential idea is it is to be tied with the work system, and unless the work system is smooth and free flowing, it is quite difficult to actually talk about goals in isolation. So that's the prelude to our conversation today. That brings me to Menti. I'm sure most of you would be aware about it. Just type menti.com on your mobile phone or on your uh, sorry, it's quite a bit of lag here. Yeah, so just type the code 6982010 on the menti.com and you will get a screen. I will just play that screen here as well. It's quite. Teams is not that great. I think Zoom is a better interface. It's quite slow in the way it actually operates.
Sorry to interrupt, Lokesh. Alternatively, on the Q&A section, there's a post published as well where you can just click on the link and vote.
I think it's okay if we take some more time for this, trying to gather all our thoughts in one place as to what are some of the things which are important when it comes to high performance in, particularly in teams and organizations. And this is quite an important aspect when we look at OKRs, when we look at goals, when we look at some of the things which are required to achieve high performance in organizations. Okay, I think this is quite interesting, and I'm sure many of you or all of you would be able to see this slide on your screens. And all these aspects of performance management, or from the point of view of goal setting, are very, very important. And when we talk about role clarity, we talk about alignment. If you look at most of the major organization management and performance management systems that are there, they all talk about this. And the entire story starts with alignment top to bottom, and so on and so forth. Now it is interesting to see that uh, how actually the work happens, and in light of some of these conversations that we have on this screen here with respect to commitment or collaboration or goal clarity or interdependence of aspects in the whole goal setting process. And now naturally there are certain aspects emerging, but let's look at work at a more micro level and try to build these up. Of course all of these are important, and of course alignment is very important when we talk about goals and goal setting. But what is it that sets teams apart from others? What is it that happens in the actual OKR process and the ensuing process of coaching, etc., that actually sets people or certain teams for success in a much better way? So coming back to our screens from there, I would like to narrate a story and kind of draw certain parallels from there as to how the orchestrated work actually happens, and how these high performance teams are in the first place set up for high performance. And I think this is going to be very crucial when we look at alignment of goals, when we look at the clarity for people in terms of what they're supposed to do or what they're not supposed to do. Now we were working with a client, and this was a very large transformation team with about 200 people in the team. And as we were working, we realized that the work is multiplying. You can well imagine that when there are 150, 200 people working on a transformation program for a set of large number of people in the organizations, how is it that tasks and goals will be managed? As we kept on working, and newer and newer concepts evolved around transformation, around change management, around the way things have to be done, over a period of time we started realizing that a classical waterfall method is something which is actually not going to work. And with tasks happening so far and wide, and a lot of people amongst these 150 200 people actually being either part-time there on the project or gig, how is it that we actually take advantage of this entire network? And not just these 200 people, but there will be larger teams involved in the design thinking, design studios, and a lot of people in the organization would be involved from different aspects of the work that have to be done as part of the change management or as part of organization transformation. One would quite often think that there are so many pieces which have to be brought together uh, to make sure that the organization is running in tandem. There is an operating organization which is actually uh, working on getting the operating business running, or getting the money in the bank, and on the other hand there is this whole set of changed ways of working that needs to be implemented in the organization. Now that being that, we saw that this is a orchestra, this is a symphony, there are various pieces of things which are coming together, and when things are being orchestrated and the symphony is being run, each individual and each musical note is of equal importance. You cannot work on the orchestra unless each and every musical note is right. And if you look at the last 50 years of history of whether it is OKR or Cushion Country, or later on the balanced scorecard, uh, or any other means of setting KRAs and KPIs, what happens is typically the organization starts the goal cascading process from top. The alignment, and we all saw that word on the screen as well. Alignment takes precedence, and it is the alignment for which people start working. Now imagine an organization where just like these musicians, you have 100,000 people or 200,000 people, or in this particular team you have 200 people. All of them are their own individual musical notes, and these musical notes have to run in tandem to achieve an end outcome which is beneficial for the program or the organization. Without getting into the details of this transformation program, you would imagine that when we look at a watershed way of managing the program, it would have contained some 5,000 or 7,000 or maybe even 10,000 line items lying on somebody's bucket or the other. How do we run this huge symphony without getting delayed, without getting bogged down by too many details, without getting demotivated as to the completion of tasks, and all of these things start coming into picture. So in the running of this symphony, the ingredients of high performance, the two things which are most notable is keeping people now. The other thing about musical notes is that in isolation they don't make any sense. They might be sounding beautiful, but they might be sounding wonderful, but each musical note by itself will not create a whole symphony or an orchestra. So each note has to contribute at a certain time, at a certain given point instance, when it has to come together from an organizational perspective to make sense. And drawing parallel to organizations, from the organization point of view, you have this whole, I'm sure most of you would have be working in large organizations which has this whole symphony of supply chain management, right from sales planning down to the operations and to the distribution, running in a very symphonic manner. So now here also in this organization, when we were working, we found that uh, making these musical notes run in tandem was quite a difficulty. If we look at just the watershed or the watershed way of managing, or waterfall way of managing the program. Now, the first time we realized it, we started working on something which is known as uh, an agile way of working. In common parlance, it is called agile, but essentially we moved to a more armed forces kind of way of working, which is squad based working. So we, kind of created squads which are going to be working on certain specific tasks and activities to make sure that the outcomes are achieved. I'm trying to tell you this story to deconstruct this whole concept of OKR. How does it work bottom up? Typically, we think of alignment top down, but we have to also think of alignment bottom up. In fact, that is what is even more important than the top down, because it is easy to intend the cascade. It is more difficult to align work bottom up. So when we realize that in the armed forces way of working, you create squads, you create specific activities, you create specific timelines, etc., in terms of achievement of tasks. So what is called agile in the terminology today, we started replicating that way of working, and then the squads coming together, and each squad meeting its goal at a certain time, etc., has to be interconnected. So there will be, let's say, 20 or 25 different squads running on different aspects of activities. Somebody is working on, let's say, a particular product, somebody else is working on an MVP of another product, and both those products are actually going to come together for a bigger MVP later on, all those kinds of complications. So these squads in a way are creating their own products. They have those smaller and smaller products which they are running with, which are going to integrate into one larger mass as we go along. So as we are setting this up, it is very, very important to also see another aspect. Is everybody's motivation the same? 200 people, 200 different motivations. Whatever amount of task setting and goal setting I do, it is quite difficult to align people from a motivation perspective. Everybody walking in tandem, everybody singing in a symphony for a particular show. So it's very, very important to see, or it was very important to understand these underlying motivations and how to align the stars in that sense from a symphonic perspective. So that's the other aspect. Uh, and let us look at the genesis of the OKR itself, and when it start first getting utilized. I'm not going to get into too much of history or mechanics of OKR, but I'll remain to the surface from an ideation point of view so that you can apply them as we go along in our organizations. But if you look at what happened at the initial stage when 98, 99, two people started Google and they started working on this system. Uh, of course, it had been running in IBM for many years before that, many decades actually, a couple of decades before that. So the system was alignment of people's motivation. Larry Page himself looking at every few weeks every engineer's scorecard, and that entailed both the OKR itself, the key results entailed in that, as well as that coaching element, as well as that element of connectedness with the organization. So it's not just an isolated system. What has happened today is that we have tried to abstractize the systems too much. Objectives are set in one end, key results are set in another way, tasks are running in a completely independent manner, and then uh, the coaching process, we might sometimes have outside OKR coaches in our organization, and so on and so forth. So there are a large number of things that we do. But imagine the role of that scrum master or that squad leader is not just a manager's role, it's that coach's role, and that is what has to be highlighted here. So that is the principle we used, and we equipped each of these teams with a squad leader, and we made sure that these squad leaders are influencers, those people who understand the teams, who understand the work, who know the subject matter a little, and these squad leaders started working with the teams to get the end outcomes in place. You won't believe things that we had planned to move in 12 months or 14 months as part of the transformation project started moving in 5 or 6 months, almost 100% ahead of time. From our role perspective, and that is where we started seeing the result of our MVPs. The other important thing, so I spoke about the work system itself, I spoke about the role of the squad leaders of or coaches. There's another important element is that most people uh, will once they have found the purpose, when they have found the meaning, most people will look for concrete outcomes which should be achieved very fast. I can have for example, I can have a vision of creating a 10 billion entity, or any larger kind of vision that I might have, like uh, collecting all the world's information and making sure it is democratically available for Google. So I can have any kind of vision which is large enough, but unless I translate that into a concrete outcome which is visible to people, the results will not get achieved. So I have to break it down to the level of an average individual. Things which are achievable in 3 months. All right, I need to collect all the information of the world, but in the next 3 months, I have to review these 100 books. And in those 100 books, this is how the information will be extracted, and so on and so forth. So, those are the kind of things that we have to do. While we attach ourselves to a distant purpose, it is very important that we also attached to a short-term target or objective which is very concrete, and this is one of the important points for assimilation of things. So that is what we did as well. What we did was within this program, we made sure that people have 28-day plans. They have 4-week plans, and those 4-week plans are of course part of sprints. So every 2 weeks there is a sprint, and then that sprint converts into certain outcomes. The sprint leads to this next sprint, and so on and so forth. So the sprint way of working did 3 or 4 wonderful things. Number one, the work started happening fast because people were more focused. 2, in the program, in the gig and the program, the short-term assignment kind of a scenario, we started utilizing people's time better. Number 3, the outcomes were interconnected because at the end of the sprint, all these squad leaders get together to see whether there are intersections in their product with other products. Wherever there is an issue, there is an agile coach which is available, which is at the overall uh, program manager level, or the product manager level, or the product head level, uh, who is looking at interconnections from different squads continuously, and then therefore things which are which used to be sounding very discrete in form of the waterfall method, where you have thousands and thousands of line items, suddenly became interconnected. Now, the whole point I'm trying to say here through this point of symphony is that each musical note is important. Musical note has to be played at a particular instance. You can't play it randomly, and you have to play it in tandem with others to create an orchestra, and that is the ingredient of high performance. That is when your musical notes will come together to symphony, which will sound beautiful to the audience in this case the customer. So that's the prelude of how we set up the whole system of work and goals together. It is not an isolated system. It should not be looked at an isolated system. It should not be looked at from a top-down alignment perspective. It is something which is bottom up. In Hoshin Kanri, there is an interesting term which is used for it, which is called catch ball. So it's a W-shaped catch ball, and where the goals travel from top to down, bottom to up, up to down, till the time you find a place where they can be achieved. Now, once you are trying to create, symphonies are many, but there is one Beethoven's. So a very important constituent of this OKR symphony is stretch goals. You set goals which are 100 or twice as hard, maybe in general. So you actually set for stretch. Number one, you set for teams, not for people. So you have to the one delinks the individual performance from the organizational or the team performance. You never attach it to a compensation system. So we will talk about some of these things as we go along, but I think this is very important at this stage to know that uh, the commitment to goals, or the uh, the aspect of connectedness to the goal will only happen if there is a team camaraderie, and camaraderie will slip down drastically if we focus a lot on compensation and reward and associated linkages to that, and then that will break the team. So there are lots of issues like that, but for now let's move to our next question for you. Ibrahim will help me with the link on the screen, or you can just type this code on the menti.com site and you will reach there. Meanwhile, let me try to open the second slide. There is a little bit of lag, as you know. I will try to be as fast as I can. Now you can see it on the screen, but don't get influenced with what others are saying. You can actually have your own view. All right, let's allow some more time for the people who are still filling in. You can either open it on your mobile or on the laptop, and this is the code here. You can just type this code and you should be able to do it. This code here. Okay, sometimes we should look at the trend and understand the end outcome. So a large number of you actually say that it is the team synergies wherein most of the goals get dropped or unmet, or the crevices in between which everything falls. So through that, I think let's come back to what we were discussing now. When we talk about symphony, yes, it is about in the team play. Of whatever we have been discussing in the last 20 or so minutes, to sum things up, and also from the point of view of what you say why goals don't get achieved, which is mostly team synergies. The first factor is that the connectedness of things, and then we were talking about it earlier on, that how do we get everybody connected to a single objective, and in which the individual's motivation plays a large role. Typically we tend to do engagement surveys in organizations and measure performance in a very dry manner. But if you look at connectedness, it is not just the reward system of your organization or the engagement system of your organization, but it is about being or appealing to the uh, individual's own self motivation. And that is where we get the best out of people, and that is a big shift which is part of the work transformation today. And we keep on hearing about purpose and meaning and some of these aspects. So there are four aspects to sum things up. One is the connectedness aspect, which is about purpose and meaning. Second is the clarity, and the first screen that we talked about, role clarity, that was the second biggest factor, as some of you also highlighted. So clarity is something which is very important. Now, clarity for what? Of course, we should talk about it as we go along. And how do we establish clarity through the method of OKRs in particular? And as we set goals for our people, as we review goals for our people or for ourselves, how do we use the technique? The third is the autonomy, which is about how autonomously the team members are working without the intervention of a supervision, without a supervisory intervention. How autonomous are people? How much are they aware of what is to be achieved, how it is to be achieved, and what shape and form it has to be achieved? So how autonomously people are able to work. The less autonomous people are, actually, and that is the counterintuitive idea that in organizations we think that hierarchies are important. The lesser the autonomy with which people are working, higher the chances of goals not being achieved, because there will always be a higher level of authority to lay the accountability on. So the accountability will travel upwards, and the work which is supposed to happen will actually not happen. So autonomy is a big piece, and that means that a lot of layers in the organizations have to be removed, both from the hierarchical management perspective as well as from the point of view of information availability, etc. In fact, that is one principle of OKRs. All the information is transparent and easily available to all, and I'm sure all of you know about it. So I'm not getting into the mechanics of that, but remaining on the top as to how actually you get to apply it in real day-to-day life. And the fourth thing is the skill, which is about, do I even have the skills to complete a certain task, whatever I am allocated? So let's say, for example, in the transformation project that we were running, we figured out that there are a couple of squad leaders who have no clue of what the task involved entails, and therefore you need to either equip them, with the right kind of skills so that they are able to do their tasks well, or you mobilize them and make sure they reach the places where they have their competencies and capabilities or skills to apply and be successful. And similarly for the team members. So the important point here is that skills or learning or competence, which is usually thought as separate and usually runs as a separate initiative in most organizations, is a CLO led organization, the learning officer led organization, uh, is sometimes not talking to the KPIs or the KRs or the O's. So they have to talk very intensely with the OKRs as to what is the degree of skills the team members or the the people working on the projects or assignments have, and how those skills will get applied to meet the results. So these are the four important ingredients for getting the high performance, and that is what we have been discussing for last half an hour or so. Now, moving to one by one, of course, we spoke a little bit about connectedness in terms of people finding a meaning and the direction. So, I mean, just to take an example from the point of view of meaning and direction, is uh, let's say you pick up any big technology company and go back to its origin. Uh, let's say Apple. And when Steve Jobs says that I want to put a ding in the universe, now that draws meaning. When he says that I want to put a ding in the universe, then that draws meaning for people who get attracted to do that kind of work, and that is where they find purpose. So the first level of connectedness for evolved beings, the people who are educated, who are working in most organizations are very educated. We might put them in categories of skilled, unskilled, etc. But whatever skill people are bringing to the table, they are actually educated to do that, and they are people who have a high degree of awareness and consciousness. So to put a ding in the universe is a very attractive idea. It is not a monetary idea. I want to create a $10 billion corporation. It's not a it's a profit making idea that our profit margin has to be 30%. So the meaning is drawn not by the incidentally, the moment we put profit motive, the motivation goes down. The moment I say, oh, by the way, I want to make $5 million, most people will get unattracted with that. The meaning is much larger and the purpose is much larger, and somehow every individual gets attracted to an idea. So let's say, for example, when we talk about uh, Google even now, or let's say Tesla, where people or engineers are working 4 days or 5 days in a go and not even going home at sometimes for 5 continuous days, just working on their deliverables. That's for meaning. That's not for salary. That is not for reward. That's not for monetary reward, at least. And that is where you draw the meaning essence, and that is in alignment. That is the first step. Typically what happens is we pick up a strategy framework. There are tens of them available. If you look at strategy from the point of view of it as a structure, point of view from the point of view of an entrepreneur, from the point of view of operations, from the point of from the point of, there's so many different points of views in strategies. But strategy will never be able to give meaning to work. The meaning from work will come from a path-breaking idea, a path-breaking thought, and that thought can be as simple as putting a ding in the universe or organizing the whole world's knowledge into one place. So meaning is very, very critical. Unless you are drawing people from the point of view of a purpose or a meaning, you have already lost some part of your battle while trying to align people and making them connected to your enterprise. The second is the direction. I can say that, I want to put a ding in the universe, but then what is the direction? Okay, we'll make iPod first, or we'll make iTunes first. It's a direct, concrete idea which can be worked upon by many. All right, I need to make iTunes, so this iTunes has to have these features. These features will work in this particular way to kind of bring an experience to the customer, and all the features and user stories start coming together to form that iTunes. And then from iTunes to iPod, which becomes a device to carry it, and then from iPod to iPhone or iPad, and so on and so forth. So that is the direction, which is very, very clear, concrete. So meaning is usually an abstract sense. Direction is something which is concrete to a large degree, and if it is not concrete, it is provided by clarity, and that is the second aspect that we should be discussing now. So yeah, so when we look at clarity, it has to be in the task that people are doing. It is not just the objective that has to be achieved. It is also the key result in terms of OKR or the tasks that have to be done on a day-to-day basis. So going to clarity. I think let me take an example of a sales team in a B2B SaaS scenario that I was working in last year. And the team was comprised of 3 or 4 kinds of roles. In the broader sense, there was a pre-sales team, there is a sales team, there is a solutioning team, etc., etc. So there are various teams which are trying to serve the customer in implementing their SaaS product on the ground. Now there are interconnection issues between the teams. This competence is not so much the issue, or the skill is not so much the issue. The pre-sales team, which is working on generating the leads, is working at an efficiency of less than 20 calls a day per agent or something like that. And they have to do a large degree of non-value added activities, including researching and putting a lot of databases together. The workflow is not set, so people can call at their own instance, and have all kinds of explanations for having not being able to do their tasks, etc. Sales people have no responsibility to necessarily carry the leads generated, inbound leads that are generated or outbound leads that are generated, and the whole system is not interconnected. In that sense, there is not enough of clarity in the tasks that people are doing. Everybody may be clear about their task. The clarity is in the interconnectedness. So that is the key differentiation. Clarity is in the interconnectedness. Clarity is not about my own task. I am a caller. I have to make 20 calls. I'm making them. Somebody else has to meet 5 clients in a day. He or she is also meeting those 5 clients. But clarity is in the interconnectedness. How our activities and tasks are aligned to achieve a certain goal, and that is where clarity pays. That is where clarity has to be built. So that is what we started doing. How do you build clarity? You build clarity bottom up. You don't build clarity top down. Now that is another myth. From the top you will start cascading the goals and it come right down to the bottom. No, we have to start building clarity bottom up through the tasks that we have to be done to meet a particular objective and a particular direction that we are flowing. So, for example, in the Steve Jobs or iTunes example that we are taking, I want to put a ding in the universe. That's ding. I need to create iTunes in next 18 months as an application which is available on iPod for my consumers, and it will transform the music industry, or it will transform the music experience for people. Direction. Objective. We need to work on 5 or 10 or 15 features of iTunes in the next 3 months. I need to work on maintaining the code quality so that the experience is in place. So that's the chain, and that is how it has to be looked at in terms of clarity. And so you build it bottom up. You build it bottom up by making the person very aware, individual very aware of what his or her role is from the point of view of meeting that end objective. So the clarity is built bottom up. So again, coming back to that the process of goal alignment, which is or the cascade, or whichever terminology we use, it is very important that we are working bottom up in terms of alignment. Now, what does clarity entail? Just to conclude that part. So the clarity entails conditions and results. So what are conditions? In every condition, can my car run at 150 miles an hour? Possibly no. But in certain conditions, it will run at 150 miles an hour. So creating those conditions and being very clear about those conditions. So, for example, I have 10 resources and this is the condition. Or I have 12 resources to do a humongous task. That's the condition. I have to meet Six Sigma level of course, that's a quality parameter, but I have to meet Six Sigma quality standards. That is a condition. My device should be running at a very high speed despite getting heated up. Those are the conditions. So in what conditions I want a certain efficiency. And the second thing is result. So under which conditions what results will be obtained, and that becomes the parameters of KR, or the key results that we talk about. So key results will always come with a numeric attached, or some kind of a measurable outcome attached, with a time attached, with those conditions attached. And this is where we have to make things very clear for people. So just to take an example of, let's say, a software code, or let's say sales activity. Let's say as a territory manager, my task is to sell 100 cartons in 1 week or 1 month. And we have all seen this. It's not that this is a new thing, but there are 100 cartons to be sold in the next 1 week of my particular product. On a daily basis, I need to make 50 calls to prospect customers, or 30 calls to prospect customers is the job of, let's say, the territory sales person. How is that task broken up so that the person is equipped to do that task on a daily basis and is able to also view completion of that? Now that is very critical aspect of the results or the task attached to that. So that will come in form of the clarity, which is driven down to the individual. So each objective will have that key result attached to it, and the quality of it attached to it in form of how it is to be achieved. The other important thing here is, and we will come to that subject, is that OKR is about objectives and key results. It doesn't mean that they're cascading top down, and I've said that number of times. It has to be a social process where most of the goals, most of the targets are actually set by people who are doing the tasks, with of course the guidance and coaching wherever required, but most of it has to come from within the team, and that is why the way of working towards these results becomes very important. So it's not just the O and KR, but the ensuing environment in which it works. So any organization which will try to implement OKR from a performance management perspective, it may not be as successful. Any organization which makes it part of an agile work process or a way of working process, then it will work. So you transform your way of working to get the maximum advantage of the system that you have. So conditions and results are very important in clarity. You provide clarity on which conditions those objectives have to be met and what results are expected. And those results are of course fairly broken down into, like I was saying, into squads, sprints, etc. So that's the part of clarity. Now, before we move to the aspect of autonomy and skill, which is quite intertwined as a subject as well, but this is where the whole principle of O and KR exists. And on a day-to-day basis, it is not, and very importantly, it is not an yearly process. It's a continuous process. So the KRs are set not for not beyond 3 months. Your objectives may be 3 year long or 5 year long, or even visionary, like putting a ding in the universe. But KRs have to be specific for achievement within 3 months. The moment we deviate from that philosophy, we are actually setting people for failure and not high performance. So what is to be done in that quarter, what is to be done in that month, what is to be done in that week is very important, because concreteness of key results is going to be the most important step in setting people for high performance. All right, so before we go to the aspect of autonomy and skill, by now we have realized that it's the discipline, it's a symphony. Each musical note coming at a specific point in time for people to be able to contribute well, and that can only be done by discipline. Nobody learns music in one day. It takes quite a while to learn and play music, and therefore discipline is of critical importance. We all know that discipline is also not achievable by force. The more we try to put pressure on people to follow a certain discipline, the more mechanical people become. They don't bring their intent to work, they bring their bodies to work. So it is very important that discipline is self-discipline. And then we have methods of creating that self-discipline. Of course, we have methods for creating that self-discipline, but more importantly, it is the work that, or it is the process which one adopts by self and finds it workable and gets into a habit of doing that again and again and again. So that's the important part as we go forward. So clarity is good, but without discipline, no results will get achieved. And for results to be achieved, we have to have right degree of autonomy and right degree of skills for people to get into a self-disciplined and a self-habituated form of achieving goals and results. Most of the organizations that have hierarchies of management, and we have seen that enough in bureaucracies, have a very standard way of upwardly delegating accountabilities, and in return projects which should happen in 3 months or 6 months take years to complete, and that happens because of not enough degree of autonomy for people to take decisions on the ground, and at the same time work getting mired in all kinds of hierarchies of information and decision making. So the very principle of clarity, I mean, just to reiterate that, is all information is freely available to everyone. So if I have 50,000 people in the organization and 50,000 people are, let's say, writing 5 OKRs each for a quarter, I have all those 250,000 available for everybody's view. It is not, in the even now I'm sure central government and armed forces would be using that. So it's called confidential report or CR. And I'm sure that process would still be existing in many organizations. So it's no more a confidential report. All your goals, all your OKRs are transparently available to everyone in the organization and can be edited, collaborated by anyone, and it is very time bound. It is very bound to the tasks and activities, and you are bound by a self discipline, not by a supervisory discipline. So that's the intent of getting into our next session. But before that, I will request you to once again go to menti.com, type this code, and help us with your views. As usual, it will take some time. I hope you have the link and you should be able to type in soon. Let's type this code over there. Okay. Okay, in interest of time, I think let's move back to what we have been discussing here. Bringing autonomy, I think that's very interesting, and I would like to go back to the first example. And of course, some of you have talked about lack of clarity itself, the feedback, fear of rejection, micromanagement, trust, etc., time pressure. So a lot of these things which become hindrances in autonomous work. But let's go back to the first example. How do you make people autonomous actually? And that is very critical in establishing an OKR culture in the organization. So going back to the first transformation work that I was talking about earlier on, uh, autonomy comes or empowerment comes when I'm very clear, as you rightly said, and when the work process is very simple to adapt and adopt. I know what is to do, and I can adopt to that way of working very fast. And when we are implementing the OKR culture, I think this is the second most important leg that we have to look at. And from the point of view of any performance management system or any kind of work management systems that uh, you might be using in your organization, it is very important to move that work management into a self-disciplined approach, and that is where the criticality of success lies. So just for an instance, when when I spoke about setting up squads and setting up teams which are working in tandem to create certain products, the squads are also very agile, and that's the whole work system that I'm talking about. How are they working on a day-to-day basis to achieve those results? And that brings me to the subject of autonomy. So in autonomy, there is two important aspects. We can, and we are not talking about individual freedom, we are talking about autonomy in teams and autonomy of work. So when we talk about autonomy of work, there are two important aspects that we have to set up. So similarly to the earlier project that I was talking about, or the earlier transformation work that I was talking about, first of all, you set up the network. There are no more project managers or team leaders. but there is a holacracy way of managing things, wherein you have product managers, you have squad leaders, you have scrums which are working. So you create some kind of a framework which is network driven, where people are easily able to share information. Of course, this requires technology tools as well. So for example, Microsoft Teams or Google Google tools which may be available, or some other tools, or Trello. There are so many products, but you need to set up those technology based tools which make sure that all information is transparently available to people all the time, and it is interconnected. And you of course set teams up for teams which are working on pointed solutions rather than for hierarchy. So the moment we try to kick in hierarchy into teams, there is a problem, or there is an issue with respect to accountability within teams. And accountability is one of the most important factors for high performance. Accountability taking, that is, not giving. So accountability taking will result into high performance. So set up holacracy and set up agile. And to set up agile, there are three tools. You divide any work into backlogs, sprints, and scrums. So backlogs is, let's say I have to create the whole iTunes. I will divide it into small backlogs, saying that all right, this is how much I have to work. This is how much I have to divide to do in the next 1 month or 2 months or 3 months. Convert that 3-month work of features into sprints, wherein you work on 2 weeks at a time or 3 weeks at a time maximum on certain outcomes, and finally do a daily scrum. So daily scrum is very critical to meeting of objectives and goals, and that's how you set up agile. And most importantly, people talk about, now this is where the important aspect. Lot of times you will say the OKR coaches. OKR coaches are nothing but agile coaches actually. So those agile coaches who equip me. Now this is not executive coaching. This is not behavioral coaching. This is action coaching. Coaching which is happening on day-to-day action, where the action coach is able to help the individual, help the participating team members in the goals or objectives that they have to achieve. Wherever there are bottlenecks, the agile coach is equipping the team with the right knowledge. So the coach's job is to equip the team with knowledge. Scrum Master's job is to equip the team with resources. So in that sense, when we talk about our earlier example, the squad leaders are Scrum Masters, and Agile coaches are those experts who are working in the team, who are subject matter experts and are able to solve problems for the teams on a day-to-day basis. So that's the role of the coach. And this whole part of agile and holacracy is very critical to the OKR culture. You just try to, if we just try to now correlate it with, let's say, a Google or a Microsoft or any other organization which has implemented OKRs, the relative degree of success would have a large chunk of responsibility here actually. How agile they are able to set themselves up, how networked they are to be able to take the advantage of all the capabilities which lie everywhere in the organization. So when you actually look at some of the literature, it is not so successful in a Microsoft versus it is a lot more successful in Google, and there is a reason. The whole framework of backlogs, sprint, scrum, and agile coaching is set so beautifully right to the topmost levels, wherein people spend a lot of time on the KRs. Even on the quarterly KRs, people will spend a lot of time on what needs to be achieved and what should be avoided. Of course, when you talk about backlogs, it is also giving a very important tool, what should not be done. So backlog is also a tool of what should not be done. We have seen organizations talking about big, hairy, audacious goals, and this big promoter view of things, or a big entrepreneur talking about big things that they want to achieve. But when you actually point it down to the resources that are available, point it down to the level of work that is required, it takes a while. And this is where you distill audacious. Of course, everything needs to remain audacious. But when you distill things that should be achieved now to be able to align with that hairy or audacious goal is backlog. So what should we do now, immediately, and how do we prioritize our work so that we keep on walking towards the direction or meaning or purpose that we have decided for ourselves. So that is what brings autonomy. Autonomy is not brought by giving a lot of accountability to the person in terms of administrative responsibility. Autonomy lies in the way we let people work, by by taking advantage of the networks that they have and they're driving, and by taking advantage of the agile culture which runs in the organization. So that's about autonomy. And then the second aspect, of course, it's autonomy and skills are so chicken and egg. There will be people who say I can make people autonomous only when they are skilled, and then there is other set of people like me who will say people will get skilled only when they are autonomous. So it's such a chicken and egg, and uh, it is therefore most important to keep skills very close to performance requirement. I'm sure many of you would have seen large learning experience platforms and learning management systems being implemented in our organizations, which will not be running at all. Sometimes people would be logging in into them for once or twice in a year, and that once or twice also for some compliance training. So the skill and autonomy is very close to each other, and it is very important that skills are kept very close to the tasks and performance, and that is the job of the coach. I'm sure many of you would be playing manager role. So as a manager, you have to see for which task, for every task that you are entailing in the key result, does the person have skill? If the person doesn't have skill, then are you able to provide resources to that individual, which will help the individual build that skill? So they're very chicken and egg, and they come close to each other, and they should always remain close to each other. The linchpin to connect skill with autonomy is the coach. So managers have to stop playing role of that manager, that manager, and start playing role of the coach in bridging those skill gaps. This cannot be done by your learning management system. This can only be done by managers themselves, the business leaders themselves, as to what skills are required for my people to meet a certain KR or a task objective. For example, I'm asking somebody to write a code, or let's say 100-line code on being able to play a video online. Imagine if the person doesn't have skill to do that on a particular platform that I'm requesting that person to write it. The person won't be able to do it. So the skill has to be there, and the skill backlog has to be created in line with the task backlog. So creating pathways, creating learning journeys for people have to be very, or pathways for skill, not for gross capabilities. Pathways for specific skills required for them to achieve their key results. I think there is a beautiful example of of uh, let's say for example some of the electronic manufacturers, like for example Samsung. They have this huge program in which uh, people can actually pick up the jazziest of courses in the best of universities if it is building a particular technology skill in them, and if it is putting them ahead of their competition and the ability to build products. So that's how we have to look at skill. What skill will be required to accelerate my goal achievement? What skills would be required to create a differentiation from others in the market? So creating dynamic capabilities for the end outcomes that I'm trying to achieve. So that's the aspect of autonomy. And then going to skills, of course, there's a coach. Skills are difficult to attain on your own, as commonly believed. Of course you can learn, but you will always require to cling on to somebody who has done it previously. So the lot of times we see YouTube videos and learn. So there's a coach there who has already mastered a skill and is teaching it. Sometimes they are able to teach us very complicated things in 5 minutes or 4 minutes. So you need a coach, and there is a coach which is required to clear away the doubts, and that is where the learning happens the most. Social learning, self-driven learning by accessing more and more resources. Resources will be on work that has been previously done by masters, and that work is something that you try to learn and replicate by yourself. So there are three important things. One, you're replicating something uh, from a previously known source. You are learning from somebody, and you are becoming better and better at it. And that is how skills are built. It is not built by educating people in a classroom. So again, very importantly, bringing skills close to the work. So if you are playing guitar, bring it close to the guitar. Don't go to classroom to learn guitar. Have a guitar by yourself and try to learn uh, by watching an expert, observing an expert, listening to an expert, or reading something which an expert has already documented. Through whatever resources and means available, but you can learn only by doing it. So that is the paradigm of skills, and that is how skills are built, by keeping them very close to task. And again, it is dependent on exposure, experience, and exploration. And what I mean by that is that unless I know, so for example, let's say I'm trying to create a new product or offering in the market. I need a set of technology skills which will help me create that product. Now, if the team has no exposure into that and do not know, they become unclear. Number one. Number two, if I stretch them too much, they get disconnected from the end objective. And at the same time, if we know that everybody clings on to the previously acquired skills. So I have previously acquired skills, I will cling on to them. So how do I make people inquisitive? It is very important to make people inquisitive for them to learn. So making people learn is not easy, particularly the adults. So you expose them, you build that inquisitiveness in people, and that inquisitiveness results into them they playing with things by themselves, experiencing it, giving them some life challenges to work, not pressuring them for work outcome, etc., and letting them experience. That is where the agile coaching comes into picture, and the coaching comes into picture from an action coaching perspective. And then let them explore, as they convert that skill into meaningful task. That is where the skill connection to autonomy lies. As people start exploring and you start using that skill, and all of us know, I recently, for example, we all have hit upon this new app called Clubhouse, and we are also learning in the game, and we're trying to explore, and as we explore, we will become an expert into it. So it is done online, on the job. It is not a classroom. Classroom may be required, but most of the learning will actually happen on the ground, and that is where an agile coach or a squad leader has a very important role to play. You would have heard of this example from the armed forces. Make people dig the pits and then fill the pits. Digging the pits and filling the pits is not an activity in isolation. It is actually training people for something, not just keeping them occupied by digging and filling it up. So the activity has a meaning in terms of certain skills that are being acquired uh, while on off-ground duties or on-ground duties. So or on ground duties. So or on peacetime duties. So it's a runtime process. The skill building, autonomy, clarity is a runtime process. You can't say that OKR is a yearly process. It is a runtime process which happens every day. You will have certain events that you will plan. So let's say end of every sprint, you will do a sprint retro to reflect on the sprint. End of every month, you might do an agile coaching session for each of your team members, etc. But this is a runtime thing. It is not something which is in isolation or a long-term process. The moment this whole OKR cycle is beyond 3 months, you can rest be assured that your goals will not be met in time. They will take much longer than what you originally planned. So monthly and quarterly rhythm of uh, coaching, review, and cascade is very important. So that brings me to the second part. Of course, first part was OKR. The second part is conversations, feedback, and recognition. All of them come together to form a well created OKR process. But unless the work process and culture is missing, the intent will not be realized, and that's the key and important thing. On the culture of OKR and Agile, just a few closing notes from my end. Learning, so your competitive advantage of the organization is at the center, which will typically be about productively achieving outcomes, creating innovative products and solutions, customer experience, employer brand. There may be others, but there is a certain advantage you're trying to gain vis-a-vis your competition in the market. Learning should be as close to the score as possible to build capabilities in this direction. Talent should harness opportunities from in the market, and that is how any work method like OKR should utilize the resources. They should be as close to the opportunities. They can harness those opportunities in the market to grow the competitive advantage nucleus. And then the culture, which is the resource, which is in the resources and knowledge sharing, that has to be sharpened through addition of holacracy and agile driven practices, wherein the knowledge is transparently available to all, resources are transparently available to all, and you set up those practices and processes. So that's it from my end. I switch on to the audience. Ibrahim, if there are any questions, we can take them now.